Good morning. I'd like to welcome you back to another edition of our Anchored in the Word morning reflection, and excited about the new week and the study that we're going to be doing this week in Psalm 34. So if you were with us this past Sunday, you'll know the text that we're dealing with, and so I'd like to invite you to turn with me to this psalm, Psalm 34. We're going to read the first section. We're not going to look at the entire psalm this week, but we will look at verses 1 through 9. So here's what it says. And by the way, this is a psalm of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, who drove him away and departed. It says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my fears. They looked upon him and were lighted, and their faces were not ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him, and saved him out of all his troubles. The Lord encampeth round about them that fear him, and delivereth them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. I love Psalm 34, and there's some very memorable verses that we find in this psalm. For instance, O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is he that trusteth in him. Or, O magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. Very, very familiar verses from the Psalms. But one of the things that I think is important for us when we're looking at a psalm like Psalm 34, we're trying to get into the details of it and understand how to apply it, is that we ought to ask the question, what was the setting in which David wrote these things? Or whoever the psalmist was, why was he writing those things? And what I love about Psalm 34 is it actually tells us the backstory for what was going on. And we see that at the beginning of the psalm, where it says that this is a psalm of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. Now, the name Abimelech is actually not a person's name, but it is a title. And so he's referring to a moment in his life where he did some very unusual things. And so for us to understand what David is referring to, we have to go to 1 Samuel chapter 21, because in that passage, it gives us the details of what was going on in David's life when he wrote these verses. And so if you have a Bible, I'd like to have you turn with me, not from Psalm 34 to 1 Samuel chapter 21. Keep a finger there so that we can look at some of the details that are there. And there are three names that are important, and we're going to probably, I may even mess it up when I'm doing the video, but there is the name Abimelech. And when we use the word Abimelech, he's referring to someone who was actually he was a king, okay? And then we have the word Achish. Achish is the name for this person, Abimelech. Abimelech being the title, and Achish being the name of the person. And he's a Philistine king. And then the third person is Ahimelech, not Abimelech, but Ahimelech. And Ahimelech was a priest in the land of Nob. And so for us to understand what is going on, we need to keep these names in the back of our minds. Ahimelech, Abimelech, and Achish, okay? One is a priest and one is a king. 1 Samuel chapter 21 verse 10 says this, And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul. And he went to Achish, king of Gath. Now Achish is Abimelech, okay? Same person. And the servant of Achish said unto him, Is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid. And Achish the king of Gath, before Achish the king of Gath, and he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself to be mad. And his hand scrabbled on the door of the gate, his spittle fell on his beard. And then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see this man is mad. Wherefore have ye brought him to me? Have I need of a madman, that I have brought this fellow in to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Now, when we read Psalm 34, we reflect on these wonderful statements like, taste and see that the Lord is good. We need to recognize that David is writing this in reflection on the moment that we just read about here. And there are actually some other details that were not stated in the text that I just read to you that are important. Basically, what's going on is David is fleeing for his life from Saul. Saul is his father-in-law. And the reason that Saul wants to kill David is not because David has done something unjust or evil or underhanded. It's because David is a man of excellence. He is a man of valor. And when Saul has watched David, he recognizes how people respond to him. He recognizes his leadership qualities, his valor, his courage, the fierceness of David's personality. And Saul looks at him and he says, this is the guy who's going to replace me. And he was afraid of David and he wanted to kill David. And so Saul's hatred for David drove him to chase him when he fled from his presence. And so as David is fleeing, he's fleeing in haste, and he comes to the land of Nob. And there in Nob, he meets a man named Ahimelech. Ahimelech is a priest. And when Ahimelech greets David, he sees that he and his men are in a hurry, and he asks some questions. He wonders if everything is okay, and David basically lies to him. He tells him that everything's good, and he says, my men are really hungry, they're famished, we need some bread. Is there anything that you can give us to go on our journey? We're in a hurry. And basically what Ahimelech says is, the only thing that I have is the leftover showbread from the day. Now this was bread that was only permitted to be eaten by the priest. If they didn't eat it, it was going to be thrown away. And because of the nature of the situation, Ahimelech basically said, under these conditions, you and your men can eat the bread because I want your life to be preserved. David also asked him if he had some kind of weapon. And he said, well, I do. I have a sword. It's a sword that you're familiar with. It's the sword of Goliath of Gath, the man that you killed. And this is ultimately what made David a hero in Israel, an unknown name. And so David takes the sword of Goliath that he used to cut off Goliath's head, and he takes the food and feeds it to his men, and then they go on their way. Well, Saul catches up with Ahimelech, and when he gets there, he basically says, why did you help a fugitive who was running from me? And Ahimelech had no idea what was going on. And so by the end of the story, a man named Doeg, who was an evil man, decided to kill Ahimelech in cold blood. And not just Ahimelech, but a mass of priests that were working there at the tabernacle. And so when they did that, one of the men was able to flee and preserve his life, and he comes to David. And as he reflects, or as he tells David what's going on, basically David is broken because he recognizes that these men died unjustly. And he also recognizes that on some level, his dishonesty has contributed to the situation. And so that actually leads to the writing of Psalm 52, where David talks about unjust lips and evil, unjust actions and dishonesty and how destructive it is. David is reflecting on the pain of that situation. But David's situation got even worse than what we're talking about at the moment, because David was so fearful for his life, he was willing to flee into the land of the Philistines. Now just think about the irony of this. Here is David, a man who was known for being a national hero in Israel. He has killed tens of thousands of Philistines in battle. He became a hero because he killed Goliath, and here he is with the sword of Goliath, and he's going to the land of the Philistines. It's a stunning story. And as David gets there, the people around Abimelech, the king, or Achish by his name, they come to Achish and they say, Achish, what are you doing? Why are you allowing David, a man who is a national hero in Israel, who's known to have slaughtered Philistines in battle, why are you allowing this man to be close to you? You can't trust him. He's a dangerous person. He's a valiant warrior. And David gets wind to the fact that these people are having a discussion about him. And David is afraid, he's fearful, he believes he's going to die. And so David believes that the best way for him to get out of the situation is to act like he is a crazy man. And so what David basically does is he begins to pretend, we could say he's acting as if he is a madman. Like someone who is laying in the gutter on the streets because they're an addict and because they have lost their desire to take care of themselves and they're out of their mind. David was acting like that. And as David acts like that, basically the response of the king is, why are you bringing this crazy man into my presence? And so it is through those circumstances that David is ultimately able to escape death. Death from Saul, death by the hand of the Philistines. And so as David looks back at that moment in his life, I ask the question, can it get a lot worse than that? And could God bring anything of good out of that? Well, let me give you a simple summary for Psalm 34. Psalm 34 and the section we're looking at reminds us that sometimes God chooses to allow some of the most unbelievably difficult experiences in life, the experiences of trouble, to be something that he ultimately uses to teach us his goodness. And so the answer to the question is absolutely yes. God has the ability to use anything to accomplish good in the life of the Christian. And so David is a prime example of this. Some of these wonderful verses, encouraging verses that uplift us and strengthen us, they were written as David reflected on one of the lowest moments in his life. And so you may say, well, Joel, what can we take away from this? And how will you set the tone for the study we'll do this week? Well, here's what I can say. One of the scriptures most memorable in the Psalms was written with that backdrop. Think about it. A man who's pretending like he's crazy. A man who has on his conscience the fact that he lied about why he was coming through the land where he was. And at the end of it, not just one man was killed, but many people were killed. And that was bearing on his conscience. David is a man who's running as a fugitive. And God can take those terrible situations and he can take those and use them to weave together something that actually is positive. And only God can do that. The second thing I'll mention is this. You may find yourself today, this week, during this season of life, in a very painful and miserable season. And the Bible is full of examples of people who were in very difficult situations. And when we read these verses, I want you to recognize that there is encouragement for you, even in the position you find yourself in today. I don't know what the circumstances are. I don't know what part you have played in the challenges that you deal with, and how much is just you have received difficult circumstances. Maybe it's a health issue, or maybe the way someone has unjustly treated you. Sometimes we deal with troubles that we didn't bring upon ourselves at all, but they're still difficult. My encouragement to you is that God is still in control. Not only is he in control, but he can take those things and he can work them together for good in your life. And Psalm 34 lays out these wonderful truths that teach us that, and we will talk about that this week. And I also want to mention this. We need to spend time in this psalm and just reflect deeply on it, not just the content, but the context, so that we can be encouraged the way that God would want us to be encouraged by it. I hope that leaves you with something to think about this morning. Lord willing, tomorrow we're gonna dig into this text a little bit further, start looking at the pieces, the details. But I wanted to start today with understanding the setting behind the scenes that led to this psalm. Have a blessed morning, and Lord willing, tomorrow we'll meet again. Bye now.